witness against torture, come to the White House today to say yes to love and justice and no to the lies and death-dealing policies of a national security state and war-making empire. The Dorothy Day Catholic Worker began this weekly Friday Peace Vigil in 1998 here at the White House to call for an end to U.S. criminal war-making in Iraq, and that we embrace God's command to renounce all war and killing and reverence and protect all life and creation. Since then, our vigil has included calling for an end to all U.S. war-making and military intervention in our world, for the abolition of all weapons of war, from nuclear weapons to killer drones, for an end to all U.S.-sponsored oppression and torture, and justice for the poor and for all victims. We remember and pray for all victims of our war-making empire, including the 9 men who have died at Guantanamo over the past 7 years. The United States continues to operate with impunity as it has waged lethal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, uses deadly killer drones as part of its kill list and assassination program in Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Somalia, and continues its criminal policy of indefinite detention and torture at Guantanamo. Regarding the present critical situation in Iraq, it is heartbreaking to see the violence and upheaval taking place. This all didn't happen in a vacuum. Listen to the words of a friend of ours who's an Iraqi political analyst, Raed Jarrar. And this is taken from an interview that Raed did on Democracy Now! Earlier this week. Raed says, "Oh, I think the present crisis has everything to do with the United States British-led invasion and occupation. The idea of destroying the strong central government and creating 3 or more partitions in Iraq was heavily promoted at that time. It was promoted sometimes God bless you, officer. Please stand with us if you can. To continue reading from Raed Jarrar, an Iraqi political analyst living here in the United States. This is from an interview that he did on Democracy Now! Earlier this week regarding the critical situation in Iraq right now. Oh, I think the present crisis has everything to do with the U.S. British-led invasion and occupation. The idea of destroying the central government and creating 3 or more partitions in Iraq was heavily promoted at that time. It was promoted sometimes on a political level, but many times on a demographic level. We saw during the occupation of Iraq, millions of Iraqis were displaced inside the country. Sunnis were kicked out of what we call now Shiite provinces, and Shiites were kicked out of what we call now Sunni provinces. Same thing happened with Kurds and Christians. So this ethnic cleansing happened during the occupation, laying grounds for making this partitioning a reality. So I think in retrospect what's happening in these few weeks of, like an uprising in these Sunni-dominated provinces in Iraq can be directly traced to the divisions that were installed by the U.S.-led occupation in 2003. The United States is still interfering in Iraq. Although the last U.S. soldiers left the country at the end of 2011, the United States continues to supply the Iraqi central government with weapons, training, and other military assistance. This year alone, the United States is sending billions of dollars worth of jet fighters and other weapons. We just included $150 million in the defense appropriations bill for training Iraq forces. Although many human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, have flagged a number of Iraqi security forces and militias as human rights abusers that the United States should stop funding. So in addition to the United States military funding, of course, there is a lot of support that to legitimate the Iraqi central government. So this week's narrative from the United States side is a good example of how the United States has been taking one side in this conflict all along. It has been arming and supporting one side of the conflict, and this side happens to be the Iraqi central government and the militias affiliated with it. There has been a lot of focus on ISIS because it makes a good media story. It's this crazy group. Everyone is an expert now on ISIS and where it came from. And it tells a compelling story for a U.S. intervention. There is an extremist terrorist group that is threatening a legitimate central government that is our friend. That is the narrative now. I think that it is important to unpack and deconstruct because on the one hand, ISIS is one of many players in this uprising. It's really naive to believe that one crazy terrorist group can take 50% of Iraq's territory in a week. There are many other players, including, I think the most important players are tribal leaders in all these provinces and their armed militias and former Iraqi officials from the Saddam Hussein government, led by the former Vice President Izzat al-Dawri, who runs a group called Al-Nashbandi. There are other smaller players like the Iraqi Islamic Army, the Mujahideen Army, the 1920 brigades. There are, I would say, at least 12 other players. So it's more indigenous. The vast majority, I would say, maybe almost everyone who's fighting is an Iraqi, unlike what the image that is being drawn by the Iraqi authorities.